this is, I'm not a huge art person. I'm pretty much. One time I was in D.C. I was youth pastor in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania at the time, and we did this. We were planning a scavenger hunt for our students around the mall there in D.C. And so we're going in some of the museums trying to find clues. So I go into one museum and ask, where's the most famous painting in this museum? They took me to it. So I'm sitting there with pen and paper looking at, I can't remember what the painting was, but trying to figure out what kind of clue would I give to this thing. And this guy comes over and he taps me on the shoulder. I'm like a 25-year-old at the time. He's like, I love seeing people in my 20s so into art. And he starts handing me all these brochures about things they have coming to the museum. And I was like, thank you very much. I don't care about art much, but I love that piece of art. And it comes from the story in Numbers 21. He was reading Numbers 20 on the bus there. Numbers 21, they travel from Mount Hor along the route to the Red Sea to go around Edom. We talked about that earlier today. But the people grew impatient on the way. They spoke against God and against Moses. Why have you brought us up out of Egypt to die in the wilderness? There's no bread, there's no water. We detest this miserable food. Then the Lord sent venomous snakes among them. They bit the people, and many Israelites died. The people came to Moses and said, we sinned when we spoke against the Lord and against you. Pray that the Lord will take the snakes away from us. So Moses prayed for the people. The Lord said to Moses, make a snake and put it on a pole. Anyone who is bitten can look at it and live. So Moses made a bronze snake, put it up on a pole. Then when anyone was bitten by a snake and looked at the bronze snake, they lived. And that's where that piece of art comes from. And then, of course, a very important application of this bronze serpent on a pole is in John chapter 3, where, the most famous verse, arguably in the Bible, is John 3:16.
Yep.
God so loved the world. Well, just before that, beginning in John chapter 3, verse, I'll go back to verse 12. I have spoken to you of earthly things, and you do not believe. How then will you believe if I speak of heavenly things? No one has ever gone into heaven except the one who came from heaven, the Son of Man. And then he says this, just as Moses lifted up the snake in the wilderness, so the Son of Man must be lifted up, that everyone who believes may have eternal life in him. So Jesus takes that story of Moses and the bronze serpent on the pole and applies it to himself. He says those who see and will look and will believe will live. It's also interesting that there's another story about this pole in, I believe it's 2 Kings 18. Let me see if I remembered right. Yeah, so Hezekiah is a great king of Judah. There weren't a lot of great kings during the divided kingdom days, but he was one of them. And Hezekiah 18, in 2 Kings 18, Hezekiah goes about all these reforms, and here's what he says. In the 3rd year of Hoshea, son of Elah, the king of Israel, Hezekiah, son of Ahaz, king of Judah, began to reign. He was 25 years old when he became king. He reigned in Jerusalem 29 years. And it says in verse 3, he did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, just as his father David had done. He removed the high places, smashed the sacred stones, cut down the Asherah poles. And listen to this. He broke into pieces the bronze snake Moses had made. That's really interesting to me. Why was the bronze snake made? Because God commanded it to be made, right? God said, make this. Anyone who looks at it, they'll live. Hezekiah goes through these reforms and destroys it. You do the right thing or the wrong thing? So I would suggest the right thing, because here was the reason he destroyed it. For up to that time, the Israelites had been burning incense to it. So it was a piece of a way to picture who Jesus was, but it eventually became a very thing they worshiped.
An idol.
And by the way, it's one of the reasons that I think God has not allowed us to find such things as the Ark of the Covenant. Because I think we find objects that God used to picture who he is, and we begin to worship those objects instead of the objects to whom they point. And so it's interesting to me that something like this was made by God's command as a way to deliver the people that he was judging, as a way to show them mercy and say, okay, do this and I'll forgive. You can have your life instead of lose it. Jesus himself says, just as Moses lifted up the snake in the wilderness, so the Son of Man will be lifted up. So all who will look to him will believe. We'll have eternal life. But Hezekiah comes along and destroys it, and rightfully so. And here's the thing. We were talking, Michelle and I were talking on the ride up here just about missions. And the challenges of missions. And I think missions, when it comes to our own Christianity, we can take wonderful things that God created for us to help us know him and love him, and we can begin to love those things more than the God they point to. And any time an object that God has given us, and it's so difficult, right? This God commanded, can you imagine how well that went over? Let's destroy that thing God said to make. That doesn't sound very good. And any time you break a tradition that has been useful in times past, but becomes the element that people think brings them closer to God, sometimes those things maybe need to be destroyed. And I think it's a reminder. I love this piece of art. It's just a good reminder that all the tools that we have, even gifts from God that he's given us to point us to Christ, we need to make sure they point us to Christ and they don't become a symbolic Christ that we worship. The other thing I love about this is here we are in a nation that's 97% Muslim, and at the bottom of the statue you see this statement. Well, you see that one, but over here, where did it go? Maybe it's on the side here. Yeah. There's a plaque around here somewhere. It was before they redesigned this at least. And it simply said, the law was given through Moses, grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. And I love that in a Muslim country like this, that there's a piece of art here, a little plaque that reminds us that it is grace and truth that comes through Christ. And Moses, who is loved by all those religions, he's the one that God used to bring the law. And the law, again, becomes a barrier to the ultimate glory of Christ. And what I love about that statement in John chapter 1, that law came through Moses, grace and truth came through Christ, is that's in verse 17. In verse 14, it says that Jesus was full of grace and truth. It wasn't a balance of the two. He's full of grace and he's full of truth. And that's who we have to be as believers. Not an either or. I was talking to Jimmy today or yesterday about the series I did on the church and homosexuality and just the challenge of that. I was talking to a good friend this last week just about that whole issue. How to talk with people about things with which we disagree. And there's a way to do it that is truth-based, that's absent of grace. There's a way to do it that is full of grace and absent of truth, and both of them are a perversion of Christ and a perversion of Christianity. And to be at a place that celebrates Moses, and on this place that he was able to look over, if it was a clear day, you'd be able to see the Dead Sea and the Jordan Valley and be able to see Jericho, which was the first city they went across to conquer. And don't worry, you will see that next Saturday. We'll drive by Jericho. But it's just a good reminder that Moses was a great man. The Bible speaks so highly of him. But the one whom we model our lives after is not Moses. It's Jesus. He's full of grace and he's full of truth. And then maybe, I took a picture of this, and I've had a picture of this thing in my office for years, just as a good reminder that the things that can help us point to Christ can also end up pointing us away from him if they become the object that we begin to elevate rather than Christ himself. May God deliver us from doing that.
Amen.
Cool. Yes.